Hi, I'm Ted Rogers. Welcome to History by the Plate. Today we're going to talk about the origins of champagne. Now, legend has it that champagne was invented by a happy, albeit blind, little Benedictine monk named Dom Perignon. The story goes that he was experimenting with different means of fermentation. Now, he discovered how to make the first sparkling wine through this experimentation and called out to his fellow monks out from the cave, "Brothers, come quickly, I am tasting the stars." Now, this story is apocryphal at best, though many a champagne marketer today will swear that it is true. No, actually the invention of champagne, though indigenous to the Champagne region in France, was accidental, and it was the tale of two countries. The Champagne region is in northern France and in the interior as well, which means it's a bit on the cold side. So when the vintners of the area would harvest the grapes, crush them, and then turn that juice into wine, they wanted to maximize their cash flow as quickly as possible. And so the minute they thought that the fermentation process was finished, they would then barrel the wine, ship it out. But here's the deal. The fermentation process hadn't actually completed. There was still live yeast in the wine, but it was dormant and had gone dormant due to the cold. Now, the primary market for the wines from this region were in England, specifically in London. So they are exporting this wine then to the London market. Now, wine at this time was shipped only in barrels, and that was due to taxation. The taxation rates for wine were based on barrels, which were all supposed to be of a similar size. Now, again, the primary market for this wine was England, and more specifically London. So when the tavern keepers stored these barrels of wine, they stored them indoors in the basements, typically, of their pubs. Now, this was a slightly more southern clime, and as well, it's a slightly more warm environment to keep the barrels inside. So what happened then was the yeast that had been dormant, because the French thought the fermentation process was over, with the warmer temperature, the yeast became active again. And with its new activity, it brought about not so much more fermentation, but actually the process of carbonation, creating the bubbles, the fizz that we associate with champagne. Now, this was very popular to a culture very familiar with beer, a fizzy alcoholic beverage. And the tavern owners, the pub keepers, were smart. They figured out that if they kept adding just a little bit of sugar periodically to these barrels of wine, they could keep this process going and keep the bubbles coming. Now, this process of having a double stage fermentation, now they didn't understand it as that, but that's what we know it as today, was first mentioned in France in the 1500s, and it was thought of as a failure in the winemaking process. It was mentioned in the mid-1600s, however, in England for the first time, where, as I mentioned, it was considered very popular. This is a culture used to a fermented, bubbly drink called beer. So it was a very, very popular addition to British pubs. Add to this then, of all things, the British timber famine. You see, by the 1700s, the British Navy was really taking off. And entrepreneurs were going through the countryside, cutting down virtually every tree they could find in order to build the ships for the British Navy. And so the British government passed a law saying that wood was so valuable and so important for national security that it could no longer be used to fire the fires for glassmaking. The glassmakers would have to turn to what had been thought of as an inferior product, which was coal. Now here's the deal. Coal burns at a much higher temperature. And so the glass that was made at this time from the coal-fired kilns was a much stronger glass, a more tempered glass. It was the first glass of strength enough that you could actually bottle this new fizzy wine from the Champagne region and depend on the bottles not exploding. Because you see, when the bottles would sometimes explode due to the pressure of the carbonation, oftentimes it killed the person who was simply trying to get a nice sip of wine. But now you had glass of quality, of strength enough that could handle the pressure of this fizzy wine. So, now, back to our happy little Benedictine monk, good old Dom Perignon. Though he did not invent champagne, he was the first to be able to introduce a sense of stabilization to the process. You see, at first what he was trying to do was to rid the wine of the bubbles, because he saw it as a failure in the winemaking process. However, by around 1688 or so, he had to succumb to economic pressure. You see, the abbey was in disrepair, and he was under great pressure to begin to increase the sales of the wine from the abbey. So, with the addition then, timing-wise, of the new enhanced British glass, these new wonderful sturdy British bottles, also enhanced by Britain's special relationship with Portugal, from which they could import cork to seal these bottles, Dom Perignon had the means to be able to bottle this fizzy wine that he was able now to control on a quality basis much better by blending the juice from different grapes together so that he could keep the sugar content of the wine stable from batch to batch to batch, which meant that he could keep the carbonation from batch to batch to batch stable as well. And so, there you have it, the new glass, the cork as a new method to seal the glass. We're missing one other thing. How do you sell it? Well, Louis XIV sampled some of Dom Perignon's wonderful new wine and declared that only for the region of Champagne in France could wine be bottled instead of sold by the barrel. So all of a sudden now, you have this product which is easier to transport than it has ever been before, because you can sell it by the bottle, by the case, instead of by the barrel. So, by 1730, this wonderful new fizzy wine from the Champagne region in France, using British bottles and corks provided by the British via Portugal, was, as you will say, the toast of the town. A matter of fact, its popularity became so great that legend has it that the proper champagne glass that we still use today was first modeled from a cast taken from the breast of Marie Antoinette. Now, I don't know about you, but I certainly hope they're talking about the goblet and not the flute. So, there you have it. A brief history of champagne. I hope that you enjoyed this. For more fun facts, more fun history, more fun recipes, please join me at www.historybytheplate.com. Again, this is Ted Rogers on History by the Plate. A very happy New Year's to you.